This was supposed to be a new demonstration of Russia's nuclear power, a test meant to reaffirm the Kremlin's position before the world. The plan? The launch of one of the most feared intercontinental ballistic missiles in the Russian arsenal, the RS-24 Yars. The message was clear, a warning for Ukraine, a signal of intimidation for NATO, and for any state that supports Kyiv. Whoever defies Russia does so at enormous risk. Only that, suspiciously, the launch did not take place. At least there is no indication that it did. No image, no video clip, no field report, nothing. And that raises an important question. What actually happened? According to several sources, including Pravda, the test had been scheduled and planned in detail. The RS-24 was supposed to be launched from the Sverdlovsk region, from a base belonging to the 433rd Regiment of the 42nd Division within the Strategic Missile Forces, a location known for similar activities, which reinforces the idea that Russia really intended to launch the missile. Moreover, Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, GUR, had confirmed a day earlier that Russia was preparing a combat training launch during the night. All signs pointed to an imminent test, but the next day, total silence. No official announcement, no confirmation from Russian authorities, no eyewitnesses. And yet, in previous launches, the spectacular images captured by civilians quickly surfaced on social media, an indirect but clear confirmation that the test had taken place. Now, no such evidence exists, which leaves us with two options. Either the test happened and was perfectly concealed, though this is unlikely given the missile's visibility, or, and this is the more plausible hypothesis, the missile was never launched at all, a failure, and a failure the Kremlin does not want to admit. Still, there had been plans, and the lack of a visible result shows that something somewhere went wrong. GUR even stated this directly, declaring, in order to exert demonstrative pressure and intimidate Ukraine, as well as EU and NATO member states, the aggressor state Russia intends to carry out a combat training launch of the RS-24 intercontinental ballistic missile from the Something doesn't add up here, which leads to the obvious question, what happened? There are a few theories, according to the New Voice of Ukraine. The first is that the RS-24 missile Russia intended to launch fell victim to the same technical problems that affected two missiles of the same type which failed at launch in 2023. In both previous cases, Russia went ahead with the launches, only to watch the missiles veer off course and crash. Russia reportedly examined the wreckage of those missiles in order to identify the problem that caused the failure. Moving on to the recently canceled launch, it is likely that Russia carried out several tests beforehand precisely to detect that defect. If so, Russia may have decided to cancel the launch entirely, rather than risk sending another uncontrolled missile into the air. After all, the purpose, as Ukraine points out, was intimidation. Quite difficult to achieve when you have a missile that cannot even reach its target. The other possible cause of failure lies in a technical malfunction that might have occurred in the early stages of the launch. This scenario suggests that the RS-24 passed all of Russia's pre-launch checks, or that Russia ignored potential malfunctions and tried to launch it anyway. Still, the missile may have suffered a failure in the very first moments after liftoff. This would explain why the missile was neither photographed nor filmed in the sky. Even if Russia had tried to launch it, it simply did not rise high enough for anyone to see it. After all, the RS-24 is supposed to be the most modern and powerful intercontinental ballistic missile in Russia's arsenal. Its production began in 2004, with Russia's goal being to create a ballistic missile that could be launched from silos or, if necessary, from a mobile launcher. The first tests of the missile were conducted in May 2007, with the Kremlin claiming the test was a success. The RS-24 was launched from the Plesetsk test site in northwestern Russia, targeting the Kura test range in Kamchatka. According to Army recognition, the missile consists of 3 stages, uses solid fuel, and is capable of traveling up to 10,500 kilometers. This means it can strike almost any target chosen by Russia in Europe and can even reach the United States, especially if launched near the Bering Strait. The missile employs an upgraded version of the Topol guidance system, based on inertial navigation and Russia's GLONASS global positioning system. With this combination, the RS-24 achieves a probable circular error of just 250 meters. The truck is equipped with an 800 horsepower engine, allowing it to travel at speeds of up to 45 kilometers per hour over a distance of about 500 kilometers. So, it is not the fastest vehicle in the world, but considering that it is used to transport several dozen tons of warheads, speed is hardly the expectation. Although some sources claim that the RS-24 can carry up to 10 warheads, most credible analyses indicate a typical payload of 3 to 6 warheads. If it carried 6 warheads, the RS-24 could deliver a total destructive power, ranging from 900 to 1,500 kilotons in a single launch. For comparison, the nuclear bomb dropped by the United States on Hiroshima had a yield of about 16 kilotons, according to the World Nuclear Association. With a potential total of up to 1,500 kilotons, the RS-24 could produce an explosion up to 94 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb, devastating any city it was aimed at. Kyiv Post provides relevant technical details about the RS-24 missile, highlighting capabilities that, at least on paper, make it nearly impossible to counter. In its final flight phase, the RS-24 can reach speeds of up to Mach 20, which makes it an extreme challenge for any current missile defense system. The first and most troubling issue for Russia is that the RS-24 failure is not an isolated case. On the contrary, there seems to be a pattern of failed launches or other technical problems arising during Russia's missile tests. For example, there have been multiple reports of Russia failing to launch its new medium-range intercontinental ballistic missile, the RS-24, but the accuracy of this information is difficult to verify. It was also rumored that Russia attempted another RS-24 launch at the beginning of 2025, although details of that alleged failure remain unclear. Forbes initially reported that the failed launch had taken place on February 6, citing Ukrainian military analyst Kirill Sazonov, who claimed the RS-24 missile did not fly very far before malfunctioning and exploding. However, both Russia and, more importantly, Ukraine denied that the failed launch had occurred. Ukraine's Ministry of Culture and Information even issued a statement saying the American media article is based only on Sazonov's assumptions, not on actual data. Russia likewise did not officially report such a launch. And, as seen in the RS-24 case, Ukraine usually knows when Russia is preparing an intercontinental ballistic missile test. With 4 failures in the last 5 launches of the Satan II missile, and the most recent successful launch dating back to April 2022, Russia may now find itself in a situation where it can no longer afford risks. The same may also be true for the RS-24 and even for the RS-24, as each failure diminishes the nuclear threat Russia poses to the rest of the world. Putin uses Russia's nuclear weapons as an instrument of pressure. This comes as no surprise to those who have followed Putin's course throughout the war in Ukraine. As highlighted by the UK House of Commons Library in December 2024, Russia modified its nuclear doctrine in November of the previous year to strengthen the use of nuclear weapons as a lever of pressure. Under the new doctrine, Russia now allows itself to strike allied countries with nuclear capabilities of non-nuclear states if it feels its sovereignty is threatened. Translation: Russia claims it can strike the US, the UK, and France because they support Ukraine, assuming Ukraine represents a sufficient threat to Russia. This doctrinal shift was the culmination of several threats made by Putin during the war in Ukraine in March 2023. Putin spoke of his plans to deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. Of course, Belarus was the ally that had already allowed Russia to use its territory to invade Ukraine in the first place. Such a deployment would also mark the first time Russia had stationed a nuclear weapon outside its own sovereign territory since the collapse of the Soviet Union. Putin has frequently resorted to nuclear rhetoric as a tool of intimidation, especially as Finland and Sweden decided to join NATO during Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That move deeply angered the Kremlin, and veiled or direct threats of nuclear weapons became part of the Moscow leader's discursive arsenal. As Ekin warned in September 2024, the frightening reality is that no one can predict with certainty if and when a nuclear-armed leader will decide to push the button. This is the uncertainty on which Putin relies, fear generated by the unknown rather than an explicit declaration of nuclear war. In this tense context, the RS-24 launch was supposed to be Russia's symbolic response, a show of force that, by its very execution, would send a clear message to the White House: Russia must not be underestimated. But the missile never left the ground. And with the test failure, the intimidating effect Putin hoped to achieve evaporated as well. It was not necessary for the Kremlin leader to issue a direct threat during his conversation with US President Donald Trump. A successful launch, with maximum media impact, would have spoken for itself. The ability to strike anywhere, anytime, that was the image Putin wanted to project. Instead, he was left with an inert missile and a loss of credibility at a critical moment. If you enjoyed this analysis, don't forget to subscribe and support us with a like. To stay up to date with the most important events reshaping the global balance of power.